day. The weather's definitely on our side for lock-in, but as always, we're locked in but not locked out. Tonight, I'm joined by the amazing Paul Shamplina. Some of you may recognise him from Channel 5's programme, Nightmare Tenants and Slum Landlords. He's also the founder of Landlord Action, and he's been working with us here at Asset for many years, so he's not a stranger to us. And I'm going to simply hand over to him. I'm going to pull up one of his slide decks because he's actually going to give us an amazing Landlord Zone update on COVID-19. So, Paul, welcome.
Thank you very much. As I said to you, Tracy, I've got the dog outside locked out. I've got the kids on the devices, so hopefully won't have any interruptions.
Yeah, well, we know we're all at home, so we know it's life as normal for the household. So I'm going to put your slide, I'm going to leave the screen, and I'm going to leave you for the next 20 minutes or so with Paul Shamplina. Do pop your questions in the comments as we go, because I'll be back with you and we'll have a chance to actually ask Paul some questions. Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Tracy. Hello, everyone. I hope you're keeping well. And in this crisis, it is literally take every day how it comes. I want to give you an update on basically what's going on, pardon me, in the world of landlording. And there was a new COVID-19 bill brought in by the government in response to this crisis. So I don't know how many people we've got online, but please feel free to whack through your questions. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. This presentation normally is about 45 minutes, so I'm going to give you a speeded up version of what's happening, what the changes are, and actually you will get some of the stuff I will cover will obviously you will encounter with regard to you and your property portfolio. So if you could put the slide up, please, Tracy. Thank you very much. And the next slide, please. So just a little bit about myself. I've been helping landlords. I worked it out from working in a firm of solicitors. I issued my first possession claim in 1991, many moons ago. So I've been helping landlords and letting agents, and I've been working in solicitors, and I was a private investigator and a debt collector and a bailiff. And then what happened was in 1999, I started Landlord Action with me and my former partner because we were fed up with solicitors charging too much money. So we offered fixed fees and a free advice line. So that's almost 20 years ago. What I've done since then is I do a lot of advisory work with the government. I was involved with the Deregulation Act relating to retaliation eviction and drafting the new section 21, which is called the 6A. I do a lot of campaigning, have been campaigning for years, and was involved in the squatters law that came in 2012, where it became a criminal act. And now I'm working on other consultations, which is the housing courts and the abolishment of section 21. And I was very pleased to receive the award as best speaker for 2019 for the Landlord Investment Show. And 3 years ago, I sold Landlord Action to a company called Hamilton Fraser. And Hamilton Fraser were insurance brokers, and we own other well-known brands in the private rental sector called My Deposits, the deposit scheme, the property redress scheme, which is a redress scheme for letting agents, Client Money Protect, which is a government-backed scheme with client money protection, as well as we do landlord insurance. We own Landlord Zone. I mean, obviously, keeping yourself informed is really important. And Landlord Zone is a breaking news website. And we've got a load of other products that we're launching. We've got another product launching literally next week, which is a mediation service for landlords and tenants through these times of crisis, when there's been many tenants obviously struggling to pay their rent and what you need to do. We have a letting agent advice line. We're doing loads of stuff. So we have over 200 staff. And we have years of experience in the private rental sector. So that's a little bit about me. And yes, I do the TV program on Channel 5 called Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords. I'm now, I've got one bit of filming on Thursday in a studio with obviously safe distancing rules permitting, doing master interviews. And that new series will come out in June. So yeah, it's been a big hit, and we get about 1 million people every episode. So that's a little bit about me. You can obviously, friend me on Facebook, and obviously the usual platforms of LinkedIn and Twitter to see what I'm up to and what's going on. So let me get through and start cracking with this webinar. Could you do the next slide, please, Tracy? Thank you very much. So with Landlord Action, what we do is we're like emergency plumbers. We help landlords when things go wrong. So the coronavirus, the impact on the economy, it's widespread across all different sectors. Okay, we did a survey literally 2 weeks ago to over 500 landlords on Landlord Zone, and believe it or not, 74% of the people that did that survey said that their tenants had called them during the lockdown to say they may struggle to pay their rent. I've worked in recessions. Obviously, this is totally unprecedented. The speed and ferocity, and obviously the government now stepping in and furloughing, and they reckon there could be 9 million employees furloughed, and there's 1.1 million people that are applying for universal credit. So the government has stepped in. As a landlord, you need to make sure that you have all the information, you know what's going on, what's the guidance with regard to you managing and renting out your property. Look, what's going to happen? We are in the unknown, and basically there might be some short-term pain for some landlords, okay, but you've really got to work with your tenants through this, and also making sure you have some sort of safety net. So I'm going to cover a lot of the subjects, what is going to happen with regard to COVID-19, what's going to happen with the courts, but if I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm going to go over the basic stuff. You know, you guys everyone is in quarantine. Actually, you know, our mental health is really important. And I know I'm stating the obvious, but getting some sort of routine. I was in shock for 7 days before I realised what we were doing, how we're doing it. And obviously, everyone's working at home. We have a business of over 220 people working remotely. So, you know, getting the exercise and obviously doing your essentials, really important. So obviously sticking to the lockdown is important, but still, how are you going to be able to run your property businesses? So let's move to the next slide, please. So even when you are doing your property visits and everything that's happening, you've still got to work out about how you've got to do it. And so obviously, you know, we all know about social distancing. We've heard it so many times. So I'm not going to state the obvious, but you know, we've got another lockdown. What I think is till the 6th of May, and we've got to wait and see what happens thereafter. They're doing them in 3 weeks splurts because obviously psychologically it could be quite a lot to take on. So we all know about the social distancing rules. These are just obviously stating the obvious, but I just wanted to put that in with regard to COVID-19. The next slide, please. So obviously self-isolating, we talk about self-isolating, but actually some of us might be managing HMOs, and how does that work with regard to dealing with tenants? I'm going to touch on that. I've got a slide on HMOs in this, but I mean, you know, I know personally 6 people that have been affected by COVID-19 that have had relatives or friends that have passed away. It's just unbelievable what's happening, and who knows how how long this is going to go on for, but the economy needs to be switched on. Everyone's working remotely. Your letting agents are working remotely. Everyone has to improvise. I think when obviously we come back out of this, bearing in mind, I think we're going to change the way that we work. I personally believe the residential housing market will stand up. People still need to live somewhere. There'll be issues with regard to tenants moving on or being able to move to other properties, because what's going to happen is that they may get stuck because their work situation has changed. But obviously, you need to make sure you have really good dialogue with your tenants and find out, you know, when you are speaking to them, is there an issue with regard to COVID-19, especially if it's a house in multiple occupation, which is really important. Next slide, please. So visiting your property. So what the government have said is only essential repairs can be carried out, and technically viewings can't take place. I know a lot of letting agents that are doing viewings remotely and are obviously using tech to obviously show the properties to prospective tenants. I spoke to a letting agent today. He said he's still getting lots of inquiries. 3 weeks ago, he said his business went down 90%. So people realise that things are changing. But of course, visiting your property, conducting essential repairs. An essential repair really is a repair which affects the tenant's living standards, and with regard to hot water, plumbing, cooking facilities. obviously that is deemed as essential repairs, and can you get the workman to do the work? You know, move-ins, move-outs, removal companies aren't really working. I know some people are working around that, but obviously the 2 meter distancing rule has to be kept. It's so important. So if we can move on, please, to the next slide. So, as I said, mandatory inspections. We know that the gas safety engineers have had a brief to say that they're not going to be doing gas safety engineer inspections. Then they've eased it up, and then they said that they can do it. But obviously, there's provisions in place. Bearing in mind, if you have a gas safety certificate or an EPC certificate that's run out and expired, make sure you have a good chain of communication, that you show that you are a reasonable landlord and that you've been tried to engage with tenants to be able to carry out the repairs. But obviously, if they're self-isolating, they may not want, obviously, a workman to go around to the property. You know, there's not going to be that much enforcement if obviously your gas safety certificate runs out, and also with regard to the EPC. So make sure you have a paper trail, make sure you have dialogue, make sure that all the communications are logged. But obviously, mandatory inspections, you know, whether they can take place or not, that depends on the gas engineer. Make sure you have that chain of communication. Next slide, please. So the right to rent checks have now changed. Beforehand, when you did the referencing, what actually would have happened is you would need to do your reference and seen personally the ID of the visa status and the passport of the individual that's coming over to work in and live in the UK. Now, what they've done with regard to right to rent checks, now you can do them remotely by Skype or video calls, where you document that you've checked the documents, but obviously you've done it by way of video tech. The government don't expect people to see people's ID and their ID cards and also their passport. So right to rent has changed. There was a Court of Appeal case with regard to right to rent to see if it was going to be scrapped. I don't think it is going to be scrapped because they thought it could be a breach of human rights. I've never been a big fan of right to rent because I thought at the time it could cause discrimination and it was making landlords become immigration officers. But obviously in the referencing process now, right to rent is mandatory. The next slide, please. The Home Office have issued guidance and they've asked tenants to submit their scanned copies and photocopies. And as I said, the video calls, make sure you record the date and make sure that it's been carried out. The next slide, please. So can tenants move in and move out? Well, house moves are not within the government's permitted guidelines. Okay, if tenants can move in and the property's empty, well, then you can make alternative plans. They are saying use common sense. There's no police powers to enforce this. If a tenant comes to the end of their tenancy, or what we are seeing is our tenants, and maybe some of the people that are tuned in here are seeing tenants that are up leaving early and actually breaking the tenancy agreement. That is happening quite often, especially in the student-let market as well. Actually, with regard to the surfaces, and when there is a checkout or when there is a move out, if a tenant is leaving, making sure that you do proper cleans and make sure wiping down the surfaces so that the coronavirus doesn't remain infectious on work surfaces. So move in and move outs are happening. Okay, technically they're not supposed to happening. I know a lot of landlords are still trying to juggle, but if you do have to respect the safe distancing rules, you must make sure you do that. And if you have a letting agent, speak to your letting agent and get some advice. Next slide, please. Voids are an issue, and they could be an issue during this crisis. You know, there's 5 things that keep a landlord awake at night: rent arrears, voids, funding maintenance, repairs, obviously the tax implications of Section 24, and we hope that maybe the government might look at possibly trying to look to see if they can do something with regard to that law change, and also the government intervention with loads of rules and regulations. Tenants are breaking tenancy agreements. They are up and leaving, especially student accommodation where universities are closed, they move back home. Okay, technically the tenant is still liable for the rent for the duration of the tenancy. If you have a guarantor, they are liable. Okay, you can offset the deposit, which only now is only 5 weeks. But also, if you do have an empty property, reach out, home key workers, councils doing direct deals and making sure that they are the tenants liable on the contract. So, you know, void periods, you've got to be creative. You don't want a property lying empty for long periods. Next slide, please, Tracy. Okay, so how to manage HMOs during a crisis. So this is challenging. You have lots of sharers, you have common parts, you might have someone self-isolating in a property. If you're managing, you need to know that. You need to have communication with the other tenants. Are they helping out? Does the tenant who's self-isolating have their own bathroom? How can they be living and work in a secluded area, which is obviously quite challenging. There is a real lack of guidance for landlords who rent out HMOs relating to this. So communication with your tenants, the other tenants, cleaning obviously in communal areas is really, really important. Reminding tenants of social distancing. You know, we are seeing a lot of HMO landlords that have been contacted by tenants that might have been working in retail or in the hospitality or tourism that have possibly lost their jobs. And that's an issue. I know one landlord that's had tenants that have been affected financially, 5 out of 6 of the rentals in one HMO. It's going to be challenging. We are in a crisis, and a lot of the mindset now for landlords and investors, and don't forget, you know, 90% of landlords have 1 and 2 properties, and the majority of landlords have jobs and they've been affected. They might have been furloughed. They might have to be applying for universal credit. At the moment, during these times, it is a little bit like survival. So, and also making sure you do have some sort of cash reserves to help you during this time and this process. So that's really, really important. Next slide, please. So the rent, I mean, mediation is going to be the way forward. So I'm suffering from hay fever, so I do apologise. Mediation is the way forward, okay? We've just launched a mediation service with the property redress scheme. If a tenant falls behind with the rent, landlord should work with them. What the government have said, no tenant should be evicted through COVID-19 crisis, especially if they've lost their job. They talked about a rent holiday. It's not a rent holiday. It's a deferment. They are changing the wording. Try and come to an agreement with your tenant. I can't stress that enough, okay? It's better to get some rent rather than not, and then get them to pay off the rent over a course of time if need be. We have just launched a new mediation service for one of our brands at the PRS. And if you want to write this down, it's called Tenancy Mediation .theprs.co.uk. We're launching that next week, and that will be in the press. But we have the mediators that will mediate between landlords and tenants. Sometimes it's quite difficult because you are not going to have tenants that will communicate with you. Okay, the next slide, please. So landlords struggling to pay their mortgage. If you are struggling, the government have said what you can contact your lender to try and get a reprieve, a payment holiday, okay? Some terms will differ, okay? But you have to show proof that the tenant has been affected by the COVID-19 crisis. Lenders won't be aggressive, okay? Some lenders, the FCA says that if you ask for a holiday, if you have been affected by COVID-19, well then it shouldn't affect your credit rating. It's really important to check with your provider and speak to them, because they will try and engage with them. There has been a government brief to all the lenders relating to this. So if you are struggling to pay your mortgage because the tenant hasn't paid, engage, don't bury yourself, your head in the sand. Next slide, please. Notice an eviction. Well, the laws changed. The laws changed on eviction. Any notice served being a Section 8 notice and a Section 21 now has a 3-month expiry period. Okay, that lasts until the end of September. So Section 8s were normally 14-day notices. Now they're 3 months. Okay, and then obviously once those notices went out, then you have to issue court proceedings. The courts have also been suspended until the 25th of June. So you can't issue any claim at court, and everything's on hold. We have approximately 500 to 600 cases at Landlord Action, okay, which are on hold, and we're waiting for advice from the government as to when they're going to start again. There will be pre-action protocol coming in, which means that you have to carry out a level of service and communication with your tenants to show that they are going to try and pay the rent, okay? So the court proceedings now, it could take 6 to 9 months to evict a tenant. So you've got to think to yourself, what can I do in the meantime? How can I engage with my tenants? As I said, the new service for mediation is tenancy mediation.theprs at the prs.co.uk. The next slide, please. And deposits. Well, you've got 5 weeks deposits. We own My Deposits. MyDeposits.co.uk has got great guides on deposits and end of tenancy deposit disputes. Obviously, deposits are going to be really important. They're still going to be protected until the end of the tenancy, and tenants need to speak to their landlord and agents to discuss ending about contracts early. And obviously, there might have to be a deed of surrender. So, but you can get information on our website, My Deposits. The deposit can still be used in lieu of rent as well. The next slide, please. And government help. There is government help out there. Okay, they are saying local authorities have a 500 million fund to assist households. Universal credit. Well, I believe there's 1.2 million people apply for universal credit. Supposedly, it took. I know someone that tried to go on the helpline. There were 140,000 in the queue. Universal credit is paid in arrears, which doesn't help. There is a furlough system, obviously, come out for self-employed people, and obviously people that are self-employed paying up to 80% of their wages. That started this week. So there's no real support for landlords out there. You need to get and find out the latest information with regard to your tenant. Have they been furloughed? Have they got proof? It's really important that you see that proof. There can be some tenants that will try and try it on, unfortunately. So you need to make sure and help them and support and signpost where they've got to go. Next slide, please. And that is my talk. That's not bad. It was 21 minutes. I did that, Tracy, for you. I did a book which was last year called The Landlord's Friend with Kate Faulkner. That is on Amazon if you want to see that. All our brands are at the bottom there. If you do have an issue with a tenant and it's a last resort to evict a tenant, you can go to our website, landlordaction.co.uk. And also a resource centre for landlords is Landlord Zone. You can go on it every day. We get about 250,000 views every month. We also have a free legal compliance toolkit as well you can get. But that has breaking news stories every day, landlordzone.co.uk. And we have a forum on there as well. The website's been going for 20 years. I'm ready for some questions now, Tracy.
Cool, that's all perfect. Let me just hide the slide a second. There we go. So we've had a couple of questions coming in already. So if you've got any questions, Paul, pop them in the comments. We're going to go through them for you. I have a quick one for you while people are putting their questions in, Paul. So one of my tenants who was actually having a problem before COVID-19, their first reaction was to phone me up and say, I can't pay my rent. And my answer was, well, how have you been affected by COVID-19? And neither are mad because they both work in a sector that is still working. Yeah. So when they said, I thought we got let off with the rent for 3 months. No, that's not the case. You don't get let off. Yeah. And funnily enough, the gas safe certificate was due while we're in COVID. So I haven't been negotiating and talking to her through her email and her phone number. And it's now at the stage where she simply won't respond to me. I can't go around to her house because I'm isolated. Yes. What would you recommend I do in this case where she's decided to just literally stop communicating?
Right, good question to kick us off, Tracy. How much rent arrears are you owed?
We are currently at £900. It's not massive. She's only a couple of months in arrears, but
right. It's an HMO. What, £450 a month?
£450 a month. And the thing is, the reason she's been having problems before is she's been consistently paying late. So she's never gone more than 8 weeks in arrears, but she's consistently late.
Right. Okay. The problem is a lot of landlords are stuck between a rock and a hard place because of the new legislation that's come in. Okay. As I said, we're running 500 to 600 cases at Landlord Action. We've got 10 solicitors and paralegals doing all the legal work. What happens is very common. So she's persistently been late. She's tried to use it as an excuse. When does her tenancy run out?
She's on a rolling monthly contract at the minute, so we could serve notice on her, but obviously at the minute we're in the position where we've got to put through.
Yeah. I mean, you've got two options. I mean, you've tried to engage with her. Now she's switched off. You could either use our mediation service, because we find a lot of tenants will engage with our mediators, and we're talking about mediators that are arbitrators that deal with my deposit disputes and complaints for landlords and tenants against letting agents, and obviously the solicitors in Landlord Action. We could do some sort of mediation where you get some sort of agreement, but of course, if she defaults on that, then you are having to serve notice. You could serve your note. I mean, what you could do is use that as mediation. Say you've got to pay this because obviously you don't want to have to end the tenancy, okay? And you want to sustain the tenancy. But as I said in my talk, you are going to get tenants that will use COVID-19 as an excuse. Yeah. You know, rents. I mean, obviously those rents aren't that high, but you know, rents historically obviously risen year on year. And actually, I predict that rents will come down on the back of this. And I think obviously the housing market will, you know, there will be investors that will be able to. I think the market will come down 10%, you know, 10, 15%. You know, we are in a financial crisis, and I think this crisis, and I've worked in recessions. I worked in recession 88, 90. You remember the interest rates are 15, 16%. Yeah. And some of the younger people, I didn't mean to say that because you look more mature, but I used to go to court racing, used to get the possession orders. And then of course we had the recession in 2008 where you get 120% mortgages, right? And money was cheap. Landlords also got to remember that, you know, what's the base rate is nothing, you know. Borrowing money is minimal. Yes, obviously the lenders are going to be they pulled out a lot of different products now because of buy to let. So I'd say go down the mediation route if we can help you, or worst case scenario, you've got to serve a notice, but bear in mind the time frame. So even if you serve a Section 21, which is now the same time as Section 8, because beforehand you could do Section 8 14 days, issue a claim, 6 weeks later have a hearing date. We're still issuing claims, believe it or not, on PCOL, which is possession claims online. So we get it in the system, but we don't know that on the 25th of June, because no one knows what's going to happen. The court, they turn around and say, well, hold on a second, you need to, we're going to suspend it for another 2 months. I mean, you know, if you go on the website Landlord Zone, we've done some breaking stories about it. So it's hard, you know, you've just got to be able to engage. The problem you've got in an HMO is if one tenant says they're not paying the rent, it can filter through to the other tenants, which is a worry as well. So I would say maybe do the mediation service, or possibly if you think that she, you know, every tenant should have a chance, but if she is taking liberties and obviously it's reoccurring, then you might have to do it. But then bearing in mind, you're not going to be able to gain possession for 6 to 9 months, period.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you for that, Paul. So we've got a question coming from the lovely Helen Lodge. Helen says, are you a landlord yourself? And if so, what percentage of your tenants have fallen behind? Because she's surprised at the small number of us that have taken steps to ensure their rent's not paid. So
yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'm a landlord. I've actually only got, I had a couple of properties. I've only got one property, and it's in Spain, which I rent out. And I get the rent year up front. And I suppose I have and that's, I've got a place in Mijas Costa I rent out. But I have the added advantage, which the landlord, the tenant, is really sweet, and I can put the rent up in 4 years. And that's another scenario. You know, if you've got a good tenant, you know, I've got a mate of mine who's one of the biggest landlords in Brighton, and he's got a tenant who's been in his property for 16 years. He only put the rent up, that he hasn't put the rent up for 5 years. So my tenant pays up front in advance. I've had obviously tenants before in my other couple of properties, which I don't have now. One thing you've got to realise is landlords have got rental insurance products. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, the insurance companies aren't paying out. And Direct Line, a lot of them, we do work for insurance companies, and they're using us for mediation. So they're not paying out. Unfortunately, you'll see the guaranteed rent and rent-to-rent market being decimated, right, because of what's happened. I mean, everything's going to change, and you have to adapt with this. You know, I still think the commercial market is going to be a far worse hit than the residential market. I mean, they brought laws in today saying you can't evict and get bailiffs in, you can't do bankruptcy demands or winding up petitions against tenants. But you think about the high street, it was struggling beforehand, Tracy. Okay, now people won't be able to recover from the back of this. So you'll have landlords. I mean, I've got a lot of friends that are big commercial landlords, and some of them are doing stuff. Some of them are saying you've got to pay up, you've got to pay up. You get what you can. If a tenant doesn't want to pay in this moment in time, there's nothing you can do. You know, nothing legal you can do, and the government know that. So, you know, and I think a lot of landlords. So there is one thing that we brought out, and it's a really good initiative that we came up with called Landlord Hero. And I would ask the people listening, is if you go onto Landlord Zone, you'll see today literally a story of a lady called Colette Lord, who helped her tenant. So every Friday we have a landlord hero, and that email address is landlordhero@landlordzone.co.uk. So you can't get rent guarantee. Referencing is going to change. I know some landlords that have been totally affected by this and are really panicking, and they don't know what to do. And I say, get what you can. And you know, a good tenant doesn't become a bad tenant overnight, Tracy. You know, and I would say work with them. And if you come out of this, your relationship with the tenant should come stronger. And actually, what is the main thing that one wants? You want your tenant to stay as long as possible.
Yeah.
You know, exactly. The average term of a tenancy before this crisis was 4 years and 3 months. Believe it or not, people don't know that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite interesting because, you know, we spoke about the issue we had with just one of the tenants where at the end of the day, she was pushing a look. I know she's pushing a look, but my buy-to-let markets tend to predominantly be in the sort of lower income, no income area. And I don't put my rents up that much if I put them up. But out of my properties, I think 70%, my tenants have been in there for over 6 to 7 years. And for
do you know what that means? That means you're a good landlord.
Yeah.
I like to hear that. Well done.
And the thing is, I had one of my tenants, to show the other side of this, whilst I've got one tenant who's trying to push a lot, I've got another tenant who the first thing they did was phone me up because they were slightly behind on rent. Only very slightly. They'd phoned me up. They'd said that her husband had been, you know, he was changing his payment date from work, and would it be all right to get paid late one month? She phoned me up the day all the announcements came out over rent. She said, please don't panic about us. Colin's got the £800 we owe you coming in from work on Friday, and it will be in your bank account by Monday morning. And it was there.
You know, and you know what? Statistically, Tracy, a housing benefit tenant will stay in your property longer, look after it better. People don't actually understand that. I was never a big fan of universal credit. I mean, the IT system was a joke. They're still paying 5-week in arrears. I've been quite critical of it. You know, don't get me started on direct payments. I mean, in 2008, under obviously the previous government, Labour, they wanted to do direct payments to empower tenants, and I was the first one to break a story in the Mail on Sunday, saying it's going to be carnage. You know, actually, there's a lot of housing benefit tenants that just can't manage their money, and if actually you're getting 6 payments, 6 different benefits in one payment, so it's all about direct payment. It's all about getting credit union. But I know a lot of housing benefit landlords that do well out of it and have really good, strong relationship with councils.
Yeah, it's quite interesting when you talk about the universal credit scheme. We've got a tenant where we get paid from by a universal credit in the DWP because she went to them and said, look, I'm vulnerable because I'm bad with money. I don't know how to manage it. So they let her go direct, but it took us 6 months to sort that. And she was going in volunteering to go direct.
I know, but the system was a bit of a joke.
It's crazy. But I did hear, and I don't know if it was true, I did hear when it first started coming out that they did a sort of beta version of it where one council were paying the universal credit to the claimants, including in it the money to pay their council tax or the bit they had to pay, and those people weren't paying the council tax back.
They call it's. I know, it's crazy, and that's part of the reasons why landlords exit the market as well. I mean, universal credit, housing benefit tenants, especially in London and the South East. You know, if you've got someone, I mean, my sister, she's on part benefit and single mother. I've been her guarantor for 6 years. You know, you rent out to housing benefit tenants, try and get a guarantor, try and get a homeowner. You know, they will stay longer. It's important. And, you know, most tenants are decent, but a lot of them can't manage their money. And one becomes cynical. And, you know, it's a shame, really, because also there's going to be a real unintended consequence. We haven't really talked about the banning of Section 21 because it is coming in and they will speed it up. And I had the government in my office talking about housing courts. We were engaging them. What they didn't realise, you have a lot of tenants that have been evicted under Section 21 that want to be evicted so they can be rehoused by the council. So they go to the council and say, this is the court order. I'm being evicted unintentionally. Can you rehouse me? When they switch that and you now need a ground to evict a tenant under Section 8, a lot of those tenants that are being evicted under Section 21 had rent arrears, but landlords are writing them off. What happens is now they have the rent arrears on the Section 8 possession order. And then a lot of the councils will think, hold on a second, you didn't pay the rent, we can't rehouse you. there's going to be a lot of homelessness with the banning of Section 21 if they don't invest properly in the court system. And I think my view is, you know, and I've done, this is my, this week is my 7th Facebook Live, webinar, podcast I've done this week, all across the board. And I think that out of this, don't forget the government are going to be in serious debt with the amount of money they're paying over. There has to be, I think that this will come back and they will see we need major investment in the social housing sector, which has been in the decline for many years. And that's why the private rental sector has propped it up.
I've always said they've been a little bit short term. And by they, I mean not the government of the day, but governments and politicians in general, a little bit short term, that all this sort of stuff they're bringing in against landlords, they're going to run out of properties to put these people in eventually.
Well, I think that the answer to that, before we maybe move on to our next question, we've had 10 housing ministers in just under 10 years. So that's it's not joined up. I mean, I sit on loads of consultation with loads of various different groups and whatever. You've got to realise now the game has changed. It's not like it was 10, 15 years ago. You know, tenants now, I mean, the tenants union, they did a campaign, they had 104,000 petitions to say that there should be free rent for 3 months. I sent an email out and I'm trying to engage with Generation Rent, and I want to do a question and answer session on Landlord Zone. We're doing loads of webinars on Landlord Zone. The problem you've got is I worry on the strength of what's happening and what's going to happen in the future, because you will get landlords that were the ones and the twos landlords, because of course a lot of them might get in debt and they need to sell. So I think the stimulus from the selling buy-to-let properties will I think that the market will come down, and it creates opportunity as well for investors.
Yeah, with every problem there's an opportunity. So anyway, we've got another question for you, Paul. So if a tenant leaves because they're struggling to pay, but they're still within their contract, would you chase for unpaid rent? Because the person asking, saying in their experience, collecting rent in the past for unpaid rent when they've left has been hopeless.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're going to get a lot of that. I've had many of the questions of that. So basically, if a tenant wants to leave, they're up and leave. Period. You know. And especially when the lockdown was happening, you had a lot of foreign nationals. They were just, you know, going, or, you know, various people were going back to family home. They are still liable for the rent until the property is re-let, okay? And they need to be reminded of. So as a landlord, if you're thinking the tenant's gone, they've moved out, it's empty, well, how do I deal with that? Well, firstly, I need to get the property re-let. I'm not going to leave the property empty to the end of the tenancy and there's another 4 or 5 months. That doesn't make sense. I need to try and re-let the property. The problem is with lockdown that no one's really moving, okay? And we hope that we're going to come out of lockdown in a few weeks, touch wood, okay? Otherwise I'll go mad. But basically what will happen is the tenant needs to know about their responsibility. You'll have a deposit, but it won't cover all of it. And then what you might need to do is you might need to mediate with it and do a payment plan. And that's what we're doing at the PRS. We're doing payment plans, getting something in agreement and say, right, I'm not 50% off. You have to pay it. You have to pay it over 3-4 months, because a lot of the time it is dead money and it's hard to try and track the tenant down because you've got to trace them. They don't leave a forwarding address, which is an issue as well. So we get it all the time because we have a debt recovery department at Landlord Action, which is normally trying to enforce the money orders we get at court, which becomes a county court judgment after. A lot of people forget that. When you get a money order at court, it's not a county court judgment. And I remember sitting, I was on the consultation when they were talking about road landlords and road letting agents. And I, around this table, and the great and the good were there with the industry. And I said, well, why don't you have a 3 strikes and you're out, like a banning order? And they brought banning orders out against landlords. So I flippantly said, well, what about, I mean, don't forget, there are road landlords out there. And obviously I'm on a TV program called Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords, and they're criminal landlords, you know. Yeah. And I wrote a blog on Landlord Zone, basically, where I shadowed Harrow Council Enforcement Team, and they can't cope. And of course, don't get me started in licensing, because licensing is a big. But I found out all about it. But I would say you have to take a commercial view. Okay, you don't want to throw good money after bad. You've got to try and track the tenant down, try and do a deal, and then you've got to try and see, well, look, my property's empty now. We're in a state of crisis. How can I let my property? Who can I do a deal with? What can I do? You know, and I'm saying now, and it was really unheard of. I mean, I live in Barnet, and I spoke to Barnet Council, and their lettings team, and now they do 3-year deals of lettings, and guarantee the rent. And I think that's got to be a way forward for a lot of landlords now, because the LHA rates have gone up.
Yeah, I mean, Barnet's always been good at that. Even when I started, Barnet was one of the councils I spoke to. It's quite interesting. Can I just clarify, Paul? You know, while you're answering that question, you talked about the PRS sort of going in and actually starting to process stuff and chasing people. Is that something you're doing as part of Landlord Action, or is that what you're doing for your own?
No, yeah. So Landlord Action and the PRS, they're sister companies. They're owned by Hamilton Fraser. So if you do the mediation, it doesn't work, then obviously Landlord Action will kick in and do the legal work. So the mediation service, which I had an idea about 4 months ago, said we need to do mediation. And then obviously this crisis happened, and we've just literally within about 2.5, 3 weeks, we've done the build, we put the process in place. We've got loads of very well-trained mediators who understand landlords, understand tenants, and tenants will engage more. And then what will happen is, so we reach out to the tenant, we do the negotiation, and then we put it in an agreement. And then there's a written agreement which you can refer to at court at a later date.
So it is a payment plan you do?
It's a payment plan, but legal payment plan, and we put it in. But what it is, it's fixed fees. So we pay. I think all in all it's about £500-600. We've made it very competitive, and we are doing that for a big insurance company at the moment. They've given us loads of instructions. So now we're launching it, and there will be a press release going to go on Tuesday to the whole industry. But if you go on the website, if you are in that situation now as a landlord, you need to reach out. Again, I gave the website, which is tenancy mediation. I forgot now. Tenancy mediation. Anyway, I forgot what it is now. I mentioned it before.
On the post, they've got it in the feed, Paul.
Oh, you've got it in the post, yeah. So my mind's gone blank. I've been speaking non-stop today through my hay fever. But basically, what happens is you can go on there. It says the 3 steps. And then you can instruct, and then we will contact you, and then you'll give us the details, and then we reach out to the tenant, because it is 6 to 9 months. What do? I need to keep the tenant on side and sustain the tenancy if I can.
Yeah, brilliant. So earlier on, you talked about the rents potentially dropping, and we've had a question in with some people asking you to elaborate in terms of why you think that will be the case.
It's going to be economy. So what's going to happen is, when we come out of this lockdown, we're going to have safe distancing. They're going to ease industries in, right? And you saw that. I don't know if you saw it in the paper, which hasn't been confirmed. The red light, the traffic light system. What's going to happen is economies are going to get going again. People have still got to be working, and the people and tenants. Tenants will struggle to pay their rent, okay? People still need to live somewhere. Landlords might exit. Landlords will be desperate to rent properties out that may be voided for a longer period. Landlords I've got a motto, Tracy, which as landlords, and if you've been a landlord a long time like you have, right, you would have seen the waves, you've seen the economy, and the buy-to-let and strategy. People need to live somewhere, and before this crisis, Savills said that the rents will go up 15%. I mean, obviously, that's not going to happen. That was before the crisis. Landlords will not want a void period. And don't forget, there's 2.1 million landlords out there, okay? And there's 9 million tenants. And then you've got build to rent, and you've got institution. So there's a lot of competition, and if you think I'm going to hold out for $225 a week, but actually you can get it, you can put it on for $200 a week, and then you've got lots of applicants, and you can choose the right tenant. Well, that makes sense. Yeah, you can't eat steak every day of the week. Sometimes you've got to eat egg and chips.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said the thing of, if you've got a great tenant that's going to stay a long time, not give you issues with the rent, I'd rather have £25 a month less.
All day long. The motto, Tracy, no news is good news.
Yeah, that's true. So we've got a question from Amy Howard for you. It's a bit of a long one, so bear with me. So her LA deals with the contact for all her tenants, and she does appreciate her LA and the good work they do. But when they wrote to the tenants, the landlord, the letting agents wrote to her tenants for her and explained their options if they're struggling. Now, Amy didn't like that, effectively, because it was almost proactively tenants come back with an issue. So what she said, is she right in staying out of it and not directly contacting her tenants, or should she be a caring landlord, contact her tenants? What would you recommend, given there's a letting agent involved?
Well, what do you pay a letting agent for?
To do their job.
Exactly. I mean, I can't stress enough. You know, there's 176 rules and regulations in renting out a property. I'm not going to name them to you, Tracy, because I don't know them. But it's hard being a landlord. Okay, put a price on your time. You know, do you want to take a call from your tenant at 5 a.m? They've lost their keys because they're drunk? No. So you've got your letting agent. You're paying your full management fee. They've written a letter. They thought for humanitarian reasons that's the right thing to do. She might not have liked it. It's done. Let them engage.
Yeah.
Let them do it. Don't get involved.
Brilliant, great advice. We've had Andrew, one of our own students, says, "Slow down, fellow. Did you just say that the rent-to-rent market wasn't a good option?" I don't think that's what you quite said, Paul. So you might clarify.
No. What the answer on rent to rent or rents? What's the question?
Rent to rent. It's about rent to rent market. So you spoke about the guaranteed rent and rent to rent market.
Yeah. So look, one thing that I do is I tell it how it is. I've been doing this for a long time. Okay. In this crisis, okay, and by the way, on my new series, you'll see me exposing 2 dodgy letting agents doing guaranteed rent and stealing loads of money. Yeah. One stole 25 grand. There's people that do to rent. If you know about property management and you've got the time and you've got the cash reserves, because at the moment we're in crisis, you've got a legal commercial contract with your landlord. Yeah, you're subletting with his consent. If your tenants don't pay the rent, can you afford to keep that HMO going, or 6 different rents or whatever? You've got to. It's not for the faint-hearted. Yes, you can make money. I'm saying that there'll be a lot of operators in the rent-to-rent guaranteed rent market that will exit. I know people that are doing rent-to-rent. They're just giving keys back to landlords.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're talking about companies. We're talking about individuals. Okay. And they're still on the hook. You know, some of them are companies. They might liquidate the company. So what I'm saying to you is there is still going to be a market, but what you'll see it shrink, and you'll see the players that are in it for the long term. But actually, a lot of people that do rent to rent, some of them will have a rent guarantee policy in place to cover them if the tenant doesn't pay the rent. They're not paying out, so there's repercussions. Yeah. So it's not for the faint-hearted, and this COVID-19 will shape the guaranteed rent and rent to rent market, and it will shrink.
Yeah, I was always amazed and surprised when the sort of COVID-19 issue came out. We went into restriction and there was the talk about rents and deferments on mortgages. There was a lot of people sort of, around the sort of Facebook message side and the comments going on Facebook were guaranteed rent and rent to rent. People were literally openly saying, "Oh, I'm just going to cancel my contract and not pay the landlord." And it's like, morally, is that right? You're having the good years, you've promised something, and now you're backing out. But yeah, it was quite interesting that you say that, because I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So we've got Tom Scarf says, can an unpaid rent in this client affect a tenant's credit record? So is there any way? There'd been talk previously of unpaid rents affecting people's credit score, as well as people paying rent being able to count it towards a credit score.
Yes.
So is that scenario actually starting to come into play at all? Is it likely to come forward?
It is. It's on the government's radar. They were talking about rental tenants passporting. It's on the. By the way, I've completely forgot, because we own so many brands. We own a website called Tenant Verify, which is a referencing company as well. So you go to Tenant Verify, we do referencing. What will happen is, I think rent payments should be linked to your credit rating. So it helps a tenant when they are applying for a mortgage, because what's happened is they go under the radar. Most landlords, if they've got a bad tenant, they won't enforce it and it doesn't show up. That's why, I've always said there should be a bad tenant register, and I've hoped to the government, but they said it'd be up for abuse, but that would just cause more homelessness. So they're not in for doing that. The game has changed. Tenants will have more rights, and you've got to realise the tenant is the customer. If they default, it should show up exactly like if you default on your credit card payment or your leasing car payment, okay? I think it's going to go that way, and I have been speaking the problem is you need all the big providers like Experian and Equifax, Dun & Bradstreet. You all need them to buy in to do that. I know there's been some talk about that, and you know, our CEO Eddie Hooker, we talk about deposits and passporting. It has been talked about, and I hope one day it happens, because it can also help a tenant. They would 98% of tenants are decent. They're paying their rent on time, and they can show it. And also, it adds, you know, just like if you, you know, your council tax, you live somewhere, it helps in your credit rating. Yes, I've been paying my rent on time for 2 years with this landlord. That's great. Okay, your credit score's gone up, and it will help the majority.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, it's an area. I mean, some people these days, generation rent, they choose to rent. They want to be able to move around places without being tied to a home that they own that they've got to sell. So that in some ways, it has been a case of, you know, as a homeowner, that goes for me on my credit score. Renters have always had that as a disadvantage, but it's going to be quite an interesting thing to implement. The logistics of, like, you know, I only manage a couple of my own houses now. The rest are with letting agents. But it's going to be interesting how that all gets implemented, given it's a bit like the digital PAYE and VAT scheme. There's going to have to be ways for us to actually upload that somebody's paid their rent.
The problem you've got is everything's fragmented, because you've got loads of landlords that manage, you know, 40%. They approximately, they say 40% of landlords manage their own properties. They might use agents for let only, but manage. They don't rent and collect. But so then you have to register that payment came in, and it's so vast. So it is a lot of work, and I think something will happen in the future, but not the near future.
Yeah, I know you mentioned earlier about rents potentially dropping a little bit because of what's happening in the market and all of that stuff. But Savills, there's a comment on the feed from Andrew that Savills are still predicting a 15% increase over 5 years.
Yeah, that was the figure that I quoted.
Yeah. And
in London, 18%, but we didn't have the COVID virus.
Right. So when that came out, it was before the.
I heard Lucian Cook, who's I heard him speak on one of the think tanks that I was on, and you know, it was very positive and it was great. But then we had the COVID-19. You know, so it will affect rents, but you just got to be realistic. Yeah. You know, you've got to know your market. You know, a real big challenge to landlords, and they don't even know about it, is build to rent. Build to rent operators or institutional investors. If you go to Wembley, I mean, you go to Manchester, there's loads of places that build loads of blocks by funds. And what they do is they keep I know the Canadian pension fund have got loads of build to rent. They have the blocks. And what it is, it's a better living experience for the millennial. So they have faster broadband, they have on-site security, they have a yoga room, they have a workspace, they have dog walking services. What happens is tenants will pay a little bit more. So what you've got to realise, if you've got a buy-to-let in an area, especially an urban area, why would a tenant pay the same rent to you when they can live in a shiny brand new building with on-site concierge services? And you need to understand that as well. You need to understand your competition. You understand the economics. Bearing in mind we're coming out of COVID-19, you don't want a void. Be realistic.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, the voids are the last thing we want, because you're paying out with nothing coming in. So we've got one last question for you, Paul, from Joseph. Was wondering your opinion on where you think might be the best place in the property industry to look for opportunities and invest in these times?
Good question. Very good question. Well, the Airbnb and short stay market obliterated, right, as to where we are. I read an article today, 90%. So a lot of those Airbnb landlords will come back into the PRS. I think if you look at the way we are going to be working, right, a lot of companies are going to think, you know what, we don't need to take a big workspace. You know, the commercial sector, I think what you'll see commercial properties on the high street maybe turned into resis. I see some of that switch, because we are in desperate need of housing. We have an ever-growing population, an older population. We have, you know, the older population that have sold their properties and they're renting. You know, you have loads more families now that are renting from beforehand. I think shared spaces, WeWork spaces and places like that, I think that they will be up and running and a lot more popular. Serviced officing, you know, I remember being in my old service office before I joined Hamilton Fraser with Landlord Action and moved my staff across. I was in a serviced office for 17 years. Could have built the building, but it was so convenient for me. Everything was all inclusive. It was just easier. So serviced officing, I think you have to look at the way everything's changing. The commercial market will take a hit. I think, like I said, I think guaranteed rent and rental rent will take a hit. I think that obviously looking at development, I think obviously lending criteria would totally change. Okay, with regard to property development, my answer, I'm looking at buying a buy-to-let at the moment for my kids somewhere near me in Barnet, whatever. But actually a property for them, but rent, and to see that it will cover itself, so a longer term investment. For me, I'm going to wait 6 to 9 months to 12 months.
Yeah,
because there will be deals. There'll be deals out there. So I would say watch and wait the market. Look at the way and see how we behave, see how industries are going. I think a lot of I think the way that we change now and the way that we work in every industry will be totally different.
And what a brilliant point to finish a wonderful session with you on, Paul. It has been a pleasure. You've been at home with Paul Shamplina, and next week, as you've probably seen scrolling across the screen, we have got 4 nights for you because we've got our usual monthly webinar. It will be on Zoom, but as long as the technology permits, we will actually be broadcasting it live simultaneously, and we'll find a way to get it there if not. Monday night, you've got Lindsay Hopkins and Just from Trafalgar Square. We've got the webinar on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I'm back at home with Ian Edwards, business owner and investor. And on Friday, the 1st of May, you will be with Harriet Dunn and Avi, who will be going through auctions. Have a brilliant weekend, everybody. Paul, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on board with us.
And if anyone wants to follow me to see what I'm up to on LinkedIn or Twitter, you can follow Landlord Action or Landlord Zone. We'll give you all the latest news.
Perfect. Brilliant. Have a wonderful weekend and enjoy. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.